That heavy, paralyzing feeling, often called laziness, is actually the brain entering a state of biological survival mode. It is an involuntary freeze response that locks you in place. You sit down with every intention to work, yet 5 minutes later, you are mindlessly scrolling through a feed. You feel a deep, growing sense of dread, but you cannot seem to force yourself to stop. Clinical research identifies this state as emotional dysregulation. The brain is struggling to manage the internal friction caused by the task at hand. Your brain uses delay as a defense mechanism. By pushing the task away, it avoids the immediate spike of stress that the work represents. By framing procrastination as a discipline problem instead of an emotional one, we stay trapped in a cycle that willpower alone cannot fix. When a difficult or boring task appears, your brain registers it as a literal physical threat. This trigger sets off a conflict between two regions, the amygdala, your fear center, and the prefrontal cortex, which handles logical decision-making. Survival instincts frequently override logic. The amygdala wins by default, forcing the body to retreat from the perceived threat of the work. Delaying the task is a biological victory for the fear center. Your brain has prioritized immediate safety over long-term goals. Once the task is delayed, the temporary relief is replaced by a cascade of biological and mental consequences. This leads to chronic anxiety. A pending task behaves like a background app draining a battery, causing a continuous release of cortisol, the stress hormone, into your system. You also face decision fatigue. Massive amounts of mental energy are wasted simply by agonizing over the fact that the work remains unfinished. The most damaging result is identity erosion. As this source notes, repeatedly breaking promises to yourself eventually destroys your fundamental self-respect. The brain's attempt to avoid short-term stress creates a permanent state of psychological exhaustion. Identity erosion leaves behind a heavy, lingering sense of guilt. Your brain processes this guilt as additional stress. This makes the original task appear even more threatening than before. Because the task now carries the weight of your guilt, the amygdala fights harder to avoid it, restarting the cycle of procrastination. Once this procrastination loop begins spinning, brute force willpower is no longer enough to stop it. Breaking this cycle requires tactical interventions that bypass the amygdala's fear response. The 5-minute rule is the first step. Rather than trying to finish a project, you only convince your brain to start for 5 minutes. This tiny commitment is too small to trigger a survival response. It allows the prefrontal cortex to initiate action without the amygdala intervening. The next solution is cognitive reframing. This involves changing the mental label you apply to the task. Instead of viewing the work as a source of fear, you proactively relabel it as a challenge. This shifts the brain from a defensive posture to an active one. These two methods neutralize the initial trigger, preventing the loop from gaining momentum. However, the backlog of guilt from previous delays can still keep the loop active. Self-compassion is a functional requirement for recovery. As the research indicates, guilt actively generates further delay. Forgiving yourself for past procrastination removes the emotional fuel the amygdala uses to sustain the loop. The paralysis you have experienced is the result of a biological feedback loop, not a lack of character. By using the 5-minute rule to start, reframing tasks as challenges, and using self-compassion to neutralize guilt, you can dismantle the loop, reclaim your self-respect, and finally get to work.